Mean Gene, are you there?
I definitely am.
Are you ready to do the interview now, or are the...
I certainly am. I'm sitting in a parking lot at Publix.
Okay. Well, I'm here with my co-host, Ton.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Is that an acronym for something that I should know?
Yeah, I weigh 2,000 pounds, actually, is what the deal is.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm catching up with you, pal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll ask you some questions about some of your early work with the American Wrestling Association since we're here in the Midwest. How did you end up working for Vern Gagne and the AWA?
Well, I'd worked at a couple of radio stations in Minneapolis, KDWB and WDGY. Back then they were known as Top 40 radio stations. And I did a morning slot at one of them and afternoon drive at the other. However, I wanted a little more flexibility and something with, I won't say more potential, but I ended up at Channel 11, which is CARE today. Back then it was WTCN, a Chris Craft station, and it happened to be the station that carried All-Star Wrestling. And that's got to go back to the 60s, that relationship. This was in April of 1971, and I happened to be walking across the studio floor on a Saturday, of all things, and certainly was not dressed to go on TV. But what I did do is get a little tap on the shoulder, and it was Vern Gagne, and he said, Marty O'Neill is unavailable this evening. Would you be available to do the wrestling show? We're going to do it live at 6 o'clock. And I said, Vern, I got to be very candid with you. I think that's a real honor for you to ask me, except I don't know jack about wrestling. So I had done some play-by-play on a few other things, like basketball and baseball and football, but wrestling was not my bag, so to speak. However, the long and the short of it is I ended up going on the air live at 6 o'clock that night, did the ring announcing, did the play-by-play, and then would slip out of the chair and over to a set and do the interviews, and that was the beginning of it all. It's a long story, but it's been a long life. Going out to the farm and falling into it, you know.
Wow.
But it worked. Right out of the chute, I could kind of tell, that I had a certain feel for it, and probably coming out of Top 40 radio and had a little entertainment in my blood that it probably was going to be a long-term thing. I didn't realize that at the time, but as I look back now, in retrospect, it surely was and is, because I'm still doing it today.
Well, what was it like working for Vern and the AWA back in those days?
Well, back in the early 70s, of course, the production values were a little bit rugged. We were doing everything at that time over at the old Calhoun Beach Manor, and they'd probably have a crowd of 150 or 200 people, and it looked like it, and it sounded like it. And there were blue curtains, and there were two cameras, both of them stationary, no handhelds, and the production values were primitive, to say the least. As you know, the WWE today has got super produced shows. They're all very high tech, and the animation and graphics and everything, and the camera shots are all up to snuff and on a par with NBC, CBS, ABC, ESPN, whoever it happens to be. I don't want to say Fox because they had cameras flying overhead and everything, but the production values increased, and even for Gagne, after I left him, his production values had to be improved upon, and I think they were.
Well, do you have any... We're in Mankato, so do you have any particular memories of coming down here to run shows and stuff?
Well, actually, I was working as a salesman at Channel 11, guys, and at that time, I didn't do any of the spot shows, but I certainly know Mankato, and know that it's a very good wrestling town. As a matter of fact, that entire south central southwestern Minnesota, and even over into Rochester and the southeastern part of the state. But Minnesota has been a hotbed not only for wrestling, but for wrestling talent. If you think of the guys that came out of the AWA, Bobby Heenan, Jesse the Body Ventura, Kenny Patera. I mean, I can go on and on and on. Jumping Jim Brunzell and the High Flyers with Greg Gagne. Those boys, even though Greg didn't make the move, Jimmy did a little bit later on and became one of the Killer Bees.
Yeah.
My memories of Minnesota are that it was the Crusher, it was the Bruiser, it was Nick Bockwinkel, it was Sheik Adnan El Casey, Jerry Blackwell, and even Sodbuster Kenny J. And the late great George Scrap Iron Gadowski.
That's right.
Yeah.
How long can I go on with this list?
Yeah, it seems like everybody of importance in wrestling has at least come through this area at one time or another.
Well, I attended a school at the University of Nebraska, and believe it or not, a guy that was maybe a couple of years older than I was, but I did get to know him, was a kid by the name of Jim Rashke, and he became known later on as Baron von Rashke. The one thing about Jimmy is he was a great amateur wrestler, and also, by the way, a collegiate football player in the Big Eight back in those days, which was pretty tough going. The only thing I noticed his work a little bit later on in life started to diminish as his eyesight kind of deteriorated. But you can't wear glasses in the ring, and sometimes I don't think he could see his opponents. You kind of had to, fetch and feel.
Well, when you left AWA and went to work for Vince McMahon, what were the circumstances behind that, if you don't mind us asking?
Well, at that particular time, in the early '80s, the landscape was starting to change with cable television, and I at that point became a pretty big part of Vern's operation there. And when he brought Hulk Hogan in, you could tell things were going to change. You could just see that this guy was going to be a big star. And Vern, with Hulk, smelled the money. Can you smell that? That's money. And Hulk made a decision that he wasn't getting compensated properly. It wasn't an equitable arrangement between him and Vern on merchandise and other assorted goodies, that he made contact with Vince McMahon Jr. in New York, and he decided he wanted to go there. I got a call shortly after Hulk firmed up his deal from Vern, saying, we're not going to let you touch anything in New York. And I said, well, to tell you the truth, there's already a offer on the table, and unless you want to match it or come close to it. And he told me, he said, if you like the job, take it.
Wow.
It'll be good riddance. Actually, he didn't think I was going to do it because I had a business in downtown Minneapolis. But that was it. I went and didn't look back. However, I will say this. I cherished the 12 and a half years that I spent in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, with the AWA. There's a lot of memorable talent that came through there, even including the obscure ones like Rene Goulet and Angelo King Kong Mosca, just to name a few.
Yeah. Well, when you went over to the WWF, were you surprised that wrestling really kind of took over the landscape of popular culture and you had all the, the cartoons and the action figures and all that stuff? Were you surprised at how quickly that happened?
Well, it was kind of a surprise for me because I've been living in a virtual vacuum with kind of a tight budget on production, and I had not been making, all that much money. I had a real job, as they said, at that time with Channel 11 as they called them then account executives. I was a peddler, in short, and I just worked Saturdays for Vern, but all of a sudden things changed in December of 1983. Vince McMahon had his programming tuned into the Northeast United States, but that quickly expanded through syndication, And before you know it, we were on a whirlwind tour of virtually the entire country. And then with the advent of cable TV, what can I tell you? People in New York were seeing people in San Francisco and vice versa. Minneapolis talent was being seen by people in Texas and Florida and all over. The Superstation out of Atlanta, WTBS, which later became TBS, owned by Ted Turner, and they were also in the wrestling business. So all of a sudden, all this wide variety of talent was being shared by wrestling fans all over the country, not just in specific territories. And with that came the superstars of wrestling. Of course, Championship Wrestling, another program produced by Vince McMahon, and at that time, Titan Sports is now World Wrestling Entertainment. But the product got very good and became mainstream. And I think a lot of that was our tie-in with MTV at the time. The war to settle the score, the brawl to settle it all, and everything that led up to WrestleMania 1. It was the genesis of a new wave of Americana and its culture.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of changing happening just through media in general in that era, in that time period. But what was it like being part of the WWF during that sort of rock and wrestling era of the 80s like that?
Well, it was a very, very exciting time for me. All of a sudden, a 3-day or 4-day-a-month job became full-time, and in the embryonic stages of that organization, I ended up probably traveling 250 days a year. And they usually were not one-night stands. I'd spend a couple of days a week in New York. Our studios were in Baltimore at that time, but I was traveling around doing interviews with the talent. I would go to them with a cameraman and a production crew, and conceivably I could work New York on Monday, Kansas City on Wednesday, and L.A. on Friday, and then shoot back home for the weekend to watch a little hockey or kind of lay back for a day or two. But Monday morning, it was back off to the races. And, of course, it wasn't just wrestling. I mean, we were doing cartoons. I was doing a lot of voiceover work, and there was a lot of post-production that was being done on the product, back at the studio in Baltimore. 1988, that studio moved up to New York, or the New York metro area in Stamford, Connecticut. Today, we share a production facility with the New York Yankees, with A&E, Arts and Entertainment Television, and the WWE. Big operation now.
Yeah. Yeah, you're mentioning some of the extra stuff that you guys did. Probably our all-time favorites are when you hit the recording studio with your renditions of Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo and Tutti Frutti. Those were good.
Yeah, those are memorable moments. I am missing a Grammy or two that I certainly thought I would have picked up. But can I tell you what? It was a lot of fun. All of a sudden, wrestling wasn't the serious thing that it had been in the past, and the shoot environment. It was all of a sudden wide open, and it was fun.
And was it difficult working for McMahon during those times? He seems like he's pretty cut and dry as far as the business world goes.
Yeah, no, I had no problems working with Vince. As a matter of fact, the first time around, I was with him for 10 years. I was the color man, then I was a play-by-play man. But when it all shook out, I became the lead interviewer for the organization. Matter of fact, probably the only one. They had a couple of other guys, but they weren't full-time people.
Yeah.
I got along very well with Vince. Sometimes he had to sit down and explain to me where we were going with a certain storyline, but once you got kind of the feel for his vision, his thinking, it was really very easy.